restaurant.
So
Then the North Rim Road goes this way, and you look down into the canyon, and there are viewpoints all along the way. And if I was to do it over, I would spend more time at the viewpoints. And so this looks into Canyon Muerto. This looks into Canyon de Chelly. The road is open, free, no charge. You can drive 24/7, and the overlooks are wonderful. Okay, what I'd like to do now is talk a little bit about the canyons themselves and a little history of the people who lived here, because I think it'll be much more meaningful for you when we look at the actual ruins. Canyon de Chelly itself, the territory that's embodied in what they call Canyon de Chelly, is about 130 square miles. That's a big area when you know that Portland is 145 square miles. So this is a big area. And it is, of course, owned by the Navajo Nation, and it's managed by the National Park Service, and it is designated as a living national monument. It's one of the most visited monuments today. And its significance, of course, is that it's one of the few places where you have a continuous residence, Native American residents. And so that's one of the reasons it is designated. Anyway, I was going to say, the monument, of course, the designation is to preserve the ruins. And today there is a population of 200 living on the canyon floor. Lots of people all around, out around the motels, et cetera, their residences. But in the canyons itself, there are about 200 people. I'm going to skip talking about the religion because I'm no authority on religion, I can tell you. But anyway, the canyon walls range in height from about 30 feet. Keep thinking you can't see, from 30 feet to 1,000 feet in height. And you'll notice they're red, and then they have streaks in them. And the red, of course, is iron. And the streaks is from water flowing over that has a manganese content in it. So the blue and the black are from the manganese spillovers. And they say there are thousands of ruins in here, not necessarily just the residences, but of course the petroglyphs. And I don't know the difference between pictographs and petroglyphs. Joanne may know, she really got into it with our guide. And also in the canyons, you'll see wildlife, and you'll see some like deer, and you'll see some horses. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the canyon's occupants. And when let me digress. When I show you the slide, you'll see the variations in the sort of geography. I don't know the proper terms, but the geography of the canyon walls, and you'll see a variation in color. The first people who they think occupied here were here about 25 BC to about 200 BC, and they were hunters. And then for some reason they left, and a new group came in called have labeled them the basket makers. And they were there from about 200 BC to 750 AD. And they dug holes, big pits, and then they covered them with vegetation to protect them from the elements. And they were farmers as opposed to hunters. And they moved out at some point for some reason that doesn't seem to be in the materials. But the significant and the ones that we're going to see today is the culture of the Anastasis. And Anastasis means ancient ones. And they have been here since we're here from about 750 to 1300. And they're the ones that built the stone walls above ground. And there's two significant ones, but you're going to see others also. And the two significant ones are the White House in Canyon de Chelly and Mummy Cave in Canyon Muerto. Well, after the Anastasis moved out, because they assume from looking at things that they look at, I guess, that there was a drought and that they were no longer able to farm. And so then the Hopis moved in and they lived on the and farmed on the valley floor. And they had not much that we're going to see was left by the Hopis except perhaps the pictographs. And the Hopis, and unfortunately for them, encountered the Navajos. And the Navajos moved in about 1700, and they're, of course, still there today. And the Navajos brought with them domestic farming that they had learned from the Spanish settlers. And can you hear the leaf blower outside? It's a little disconcerting. I'm sorry about that. Anyway, what the Navajo time period, which is of course today also, wasn't too. It was a lot of fighting with other tribes and with the Spanish. In fact, in 1801, a Spanish military expedition came into the valley and fought with the Navajos, and the Navajos lost 115 Navajo warriors in one day. So they've had kind of a, it hasn't been all peace and quiet. And the sum and substance is that the canyons have been a sacred refuge for the Navajo for centuries. And as I said today, there are 200 people or 40 families that live in the canyons. Okay, let's look at, does anybody see a ruin? Well, there's one here.
Yeah.
Right here.
Mm-hmm.
And this is no surprise, it's called Junction Ruins. The names aren't very creative, I'll tell you. And it's hard, you'll see a lot more detail later, but here's a dwelling here, and there must have been a lot of dwellings in here. Mm. And just a second, my pages are kind of mixed up here. Okay. This is Junction Ruin, and there were 10 dwellings in here and a kiva. And also, let's take a look on the valley floor. This is a farm, a current day farm. And of course, you see the staining on the walls, and then you'll see how pretty flat it is up above. And I just wanted to show the difference in the geology or the configuration of the walls. This is moving up the canyon. We're moving up towards the other ruins. Now this is from another overlook point called Face Rock. And you see how different that is? Ooh. And now we're at First Ruins, and you're probably going to get tired of hearing me say this. I just can't figure out how they got up to the ruins. Here's the ground level. I hope you can see my cursor. And then, of course, that's quite a distance. And then this is quite a distance. So anyway, that's the ruin. This is the same ruin, and I will zero in on it. And you can see the kiva. Now, the kiva is where they had their religious ceremonies and their governmental meetings. So apparently they had some kind of government structure. So you can see here. And then we're moving further up Canyon de Chelly. This is, again, see how the rock formations change. And we happened across a herd of deer. And this one, I guess, is curious about us. Thank heavens. And this is not a wild horse, I don't think. There'd probably be a herd. But the beautiful vegetation, look at those trees and the grace on the trees. Now, Joanne, I think you can help with this because you and our guide were talking about the pictographs and petroglyphs. And what's curious to me is there must be some kind of paint. Now, these are really old. These are hundreds of years old. And how have they survived the weather? And I don't know, did they spill the paint bucket here or is that rain? I mean, you know, is that intended? I don't know.
So Adrian asked me to start researching, and I researched, but I didn't get very much farther than you did. But one thing that for sure is that there are gods here. There are people who they don't have one God, but people, things that they would worship, which are often creation or animals. They have some funny things on other ones, some games that they're doing, but I don't know what they used either, because it is really stuck on there. I mean, we couldn't touch it, but everything else has been washed away, as you see. So whether they had made some kind of paint, you can see a lot of the ducks and the chicken, and then that guy with the the glasses is either probably a chief or a god. So they have these throughout the whole canyon. Then sometimes I would think on some other ones, like, was this a child playing? But then I thought, how could they get something that could stay that long? You know, I think the duck there and the one toward the very top, that is a different color of paint there, but they all have stayed on for hundreds of years. Adrian, I'm going to talk a little bit about, because I was muted and you didn't hear me, about a couple other things, okay?
Sure.
So I just need to talk to you what it's like to go with Adrian Brockman on a trip, and how incredibly planned she is, and it makes the trip also different. But in particular, if you go to the canyons, light makes a big difference, as it always does in photography. And so when we were at the top of the canyon, she had figured out exactly from all the photographers who had gone before what time to get the kind of light that you saw in those canyons. And it was on both of them, we felt like she said, we wish we had more time because we lost the light. And then you get, because they're so big and deep, you get shade within there. Those trees are turning. They're turning for the season. Even though we're in October, the green was going to yellow. And although they didn't have water usually, they had been flooded out during the monsoons that we also had up here in Flagstaff. And so when we're in this car, we are going on ruts. I mean, we're not talking that there's like a road like we normally know. We have ruts from all the cars that have gone in. And Ben, our driver, would choose a rut. And we hoped always that rut would not go into another rut, which it always would. And he would go up and down and around and all over. So he was determined that we would see every petroglyph. Now, we would ask him about spirituality and a lot of other things, but he was determined that we would see the buildings and the petroglyphs. And he gave us some history. He was, I don't think I gave it to Adrian, but he had been raised in the canyon, our guide. So he had all sorts of little things that he told us about his childhood. So just a couple more things that I wanted to add.
Thank you. And I'm going to show
Mary Lou has a question, I think. No, your hand is up. Okay, never mind. Go ahead, Adrian.
Now this is a different kind. There were some that were chiseled in the wall. And notice this little symbol up here. You'll see it on another one later on that I'm going to show you that's in Canyon Muerto. Okay, now this is the reason I went to photograph this. The old photographs of this are magnificent. And since then, they've fenced it, and you know the vegetation was off the trees rather than keeping the vegetation down. But this is the White House ruin. It had 80 rooms to it, and it was the different. This is I keep pointing with my finger. This is 50 feet above ground level. We're going to see a better picture of it in a minute. And the reason it's called White House is because the inside of the buildings was plastered white. And apparently, if you can get in there, you can see. And I don't know, there's a trail that comes down, and I think you can see inside some of these from the trail. And let me say, you can't go on the canyon floor for good reason without a Navajo guide or a National Park Service guide. But there is a trail down to this particular ruin, and that is the only access that is legal, so to speak, for you to come down. And I don't know how far down you can come to the ruin. But what I wanted to point out here, I'm going to enlarge it, is look at all the stones they had to pick up. And this is before horses. They couldn't have made a wagon or, you know, or tied them in a bundle of skin and dragged them with a horse. They had to pick up all those stones. It's amazing. And you're going to see that with Chaco Canyon also. Okay, that's the end of Canyon de Chelly. Canyon Muerto, by all means, be sure and go to Canyon Muerto also. It's equally as interesting. And you can see again what it looks like to be down on the canyon floor. I think it's quite beautiful. And I was fascinated by this stain. These look like the feet of an ostrich, the neck of an ostrich, and the face of an ostrich. I just thought it was kind of, you know, natural art. And again, I want to point out, look at the sun. The sun is hitting, see how the purple and how boring it is when the sun isn't hitting it right in the best way. And this is really magnificent over here. Though it's this is catching the reflections of this. And that's what you want to get in Zion. Okay, this is now we are at Thunderbird Lodge Ruin. Now, there's also a Thunderbird Lodge motel. So I tried to do research on this particular ruin, and there's nothing. It's all about the motel. So I can't tell you anything about this particular ruin. It looks to be large. This looks to be the Kiva. I will go get closer. This would be the Kiva. And of course, these would be the residents, the dwellings. I think this is Ledge Ruin, but I could not find a similar picture in the internet to give it a name. And I don't know much about it. Okay, does anybody here see the pictographs? Well, they're right here.
Yeah.
So you talk, I don't know how they did it. Here's the ground. I mean, this is quite a climb up here. And this is what it looks like when after you climb up. No, if I'm with the telephoto lens.
There's the deer though. I mean,
yeah, that's a deer for sure. And then there's ducks,
yeah,
and people. And I don't know what this is. It looks like a dog, but I don't know if they had dogs there or not.
Yeah.
And that's Roundhouse, and you can find all kinds of pictures of it, but no information about what it was. I just don't know. I'm guessing it was some kind of public area. Now this is a famous ruin, and it is a very large ruin. It had 91 rooms. Some of the buildings were 4 stories. It had 3 kivas. And I've seen pictures from Overlook, and you can see how enormous it was. But for some reason, from the ground level, it doesn't look that way. But it was named Antelope House because the inside had paintings of antelope on all the walls. And of course, we have the little 21st century edition here. Now, this one is Mummy Cave, and it's my favorite slide. This is something beautiful about it. It reminds me of a wildebeest mane, And great, there's a grace to this one that I really like. And it had 80 rooms, 3 Kivas, and this building here had 3 stories. And it's 70 feet above the ground, although I think you could scurry up that if you were really in good shape. But anyway, this is the last, well, no, Massacre Cave is the last one in Canyon Muerto. And our guide kind of said, well, this, which was on the wall, he said, those are the Navajo kids. So I thought they'd taken the chalk drawing. And when I was doing, and I thought that would just wash off in the rain. Not true. That's quite old. It's shown on the internet. And I believe maybe the Navajo kids did do it, but it's chiseled into the wall. Okay, having looked at the pictures, having looked at the pictures, gonna go back here. I'd like to just give you some thoughts that people have expressed about the canyon, so that when we get to the end and we talk about the spirituality, you'll kind of have this to go along with it. Some people have opined that the canyons contain the soul of the Navajo culture. The canyons are the most sacred place on earth, and that was Joseph Campbell. Agreeing with Campbell was Carl Jung, who said it's the only place outside the Nile that truly embodies the essence of antiquity. Others have said that it is full of stories which hold the spirits of the people, and that specifically places in the canyon literally cry out with the pain and wailing of one's ancestors. And another person said, if the people stay long enough, the spirits will begin to speak to them. It is the power of the spirits coming from the land. And lastly, someone said, landscapes can be spiritual. The soaring expanse of a mountain peak can be inspiring. The ever-shifting sands of a field of dunes makes human time seem inconsequential. Then there are some landscapes that are interwoven with humanity. And these canyons are just such a place. So it's impossible to peer into the canyons and not feel the 400 generations of souls that have lived there. There are ruins and evidence of occupation in every nook and cranny. It is impossible to separate rock and man. The landscape is alive. Okay, I'm just going to give you a quick look at the Chaco Canyon, because they're of the same time period. And you'll see, again, the use of rock. This will take a minute because it's too big of a file. Now, take a look here. I'm going to enlarge. Again, just as I pointed out before, how many rocks it takes to make 6 inches. Where they got, I don't know how they collected all those rocks. Now, the difference is in Chaco Canyon, you can go in, well, at least when I was there, you could go into the structures and you could walk through them. Okay, that concludes my presentation for right now. Joanne, it's all yours. I hope I didn't cut myself off here.
We still see you.
We still see you.
There we go.
So for me, and maybe this has happened for some of you, I've had a real awakening living next to Navajo land and experiencing what in fact Native Americans have experienced their whole lives. You had just a little tiny touch of that when you heard about the Spanish coming in and taking over the canyon and pushing people out. Well, you know, you can times that times thousands of what happened across the United States as the explorers came in. And so where I'd like to start, and then we can maybe move into some history, is when you were growing up, this is why I need to be able to see people. When you were growing up, what was an Indian?
A warrior.
Yeah, Diana?
I was. I am a member of the Massacre Tribe, which is also known as the Creek Indian. I am 1/8. I have my Indian card. So I grew up knowing, well, my mother's family said, don't tell anybody you're an Indian. My dad's family said, we're all Indian. So I grew up quite close to the Indians.
And did you ever have a time where you were a little ashamed of being an Indian?
I was not. I was not.
Okay. So, Cheryl, what's an Indian?
Growing up, the cowboys and Indians fought. And the Indians were portrayed as the bad guys, and the cowboys had to take care of it all. And the Indians were scalpers, and everything they said about it terrified kids.
Right.
So that sadly is what I grew up with.
Right. Mary?
Grew up in upstate New York in the midst of the Iroquois Nation. And that was an extremely powerful, well-structured, well-organized bunch of intelligent people that had formed a great confederation of many tribes. So I grew up with huge respect for Indians and a huge respect for the land.
Okay.
Wow.
Some positive things. Anybody else? Was that Elaine down here? Elaine?
Yeah. I grew up in Tacoma, and the Nisqually were part of that community, and I just grew up with them as part of the community. And the Fort Nisqually was a place that we went out to for, it's been moved to Point Defiance Park, but it was a place that we went to, but the history was always taught from, both sides of it. And they were simply people that lived in the community.
I think Allie and Carol and then Meg.
Okay.
Yeah, I grew up in Utah, and we spent almost every summer going down to Lake Powell. So all of these ruins and things were very familiar to me. So an Indian to me was the Anastasis. And Adrian kept asking about how they got up to the ruins. As a little kid, before the water in Lake Powell rose, there were little cups in the sides of the wall. And that's, as little kids, we were able to climb up there. It would scare my mom and dad half to death, but we would climb up to those ruins and look around. It was amazing. But to me, the Anasazi Indians were really cool. And I have lots of pictures of pictographs and ruins from my time down there in Lake Powell. And that's Merida giving her 2 cents about Indians, apparently.
Okay. Your dog, Allie. Okay, thank you. Carol.
Oh, well, I grew up on the Mexican border in El Paso, and the main Indians around that area were the Mescalero Apaches. Their reservation was about an hour's drive north of El Paso, and we used to go up there all the time because they had their woods or forests open if they let people come in, to do day picnicking and all that. And then over in southern Arizona, the Chiricahua Apaches. And my, sense of history from them was that they were very fierce fighters and resisted to the very end. I don't know if it's true or not because I never checked it as an adult, but as a kid, I heard that the Mescaleros were the last to sign a peace treaty. And so I guess, again, I didn't have particularly negative impressions of them, that they were a very fierce, proud people. And as a kid, I was interested in reading about the West, and we did go to Mesa Verde. And anyway, so I guess I would say of course, I went to see cowboy and Indian movies, but I would guess my impression of these Southwestern tribes was one of respect.
Okay, Meg now.
Well, I was born in Montana, spent my childhood there, and the Indians had to use the separate restrooms and separate water fountains. So that was not a good beginning and an attitude. And then when Bill was in the public health service, and we were in New Mexico, I taught the Pueblo children and just discovered a very gentle, lovely group of people, enjoyed that very much. And the most recent experience for me was really unique. We lived in Arizona, and a friend had started a program with the Yankee Indian tribe there. So we were mentoring and tutoring Yaqui children, and the Yaquis were kind of the bottom rung of that Indian nation, that group of Indian nations in Arizona. Very poor and had the temerity to never go to war, so they didn't get wonderful peace treaties and a lot of the benefits. So it was quite a spectrum from childhood through adulthood to work with the different tribes and different people.
So you all had way more positive experiences than most people have about Native Americans, because like Diana, what is Native American? And partly that's because you live in the West. But as the explorers went through from east to west, they did not, there was one of the movies I watched with NPR. Well, let me start back a little bit. What I would love to recommend to you is that the Episcopal Church, and Diana said she started it, but I don't know if it's anywhere else, put out an 8-week series on, it's called This is Sacred Ground, or Sacred Ground. And it is a story about racism across all countries, across all tribes or races. And what it tries to do is just show the history of what has happened. And there, I don't know that as I read it, there was any of the writers were judgment. They were more presenting and then seeing what we felt about it. But what was hard for me to see, and I never really thought about it, that almost all the part of the United States was covered with Native Americans everywhere. And that they just got, at the beginning, they were helpful. And Thanksgiving was not Thanksgiving, as you know, it was a trade deal. And that when you, I think it's NPR that has it, all these things you can see within Sacred Ground. But as greed came in, as people wanting land, and also as enslavement came in, Native Americans were often enslaved, and they would fight until they could no longer fight. And their land slowly but surely, as they went across, was taken away, and they would be given something else. And what kind of lands are Native Americans given?
Very good land.
Terrible.
What?
Terrible.
Bad land.
Bad land.
Left over.
Leftover. When you drive to these beautiful canyons, you drive through not very many places where you can get gas and things. It's very, very barren. There's a lot of people who live on Navajo lands, but they are not lands that necessarily you can be really productive on, and people get squished into them. One of the things my son does, he's a harvester for the Forest Service, and they gather up wood as they harvest and give it to the tribes, because I think it's a majority of the houses in Navajo land do not have heat, and they don't have access to coal anymore. And so he puts it in piles, and then tells the tribes where it is, and they come in. And it's a lot of people do it, but it's called Wood for Life. Wood for Life. And in Navajo land, they have the same, Allie, I think it was talking about Utah, but it's, and you know this too, I lived in Salt Lake City for 13 years, and the radiation from the testing of the bomb went all over Navajo land, and as it did around southern Utah. And so there are big parts of the water that are not okay. And just this year, under Biden, he came in and he's going to clean up water and get better water for the Native Americans. But it's not like, and it sounds like there's places that you were that it wasn't as harsh as this, but my experience has been often when I travel that it is that harsh, that the poverty is extreme. When we had COVID, we didn't get enough information out there, and we had hundreds of elders die because they all lived together within a house. And then when they were told what to do and exactly how to take care of COVID, they did it and stopped COVID. If you look at the map there, Navajo land is one of the ones that is mostly vaccinated in the United States of America, because they saw what happened and they listened. And so I just wanted, and maybe some others of you can talk, but to be a Native American is not necessarily easy. And so people leave the reservations and they go to the cities. And I don't know, has any of you read this book? There? Mary Lou? Anybody else? Okay. It is one of the best books telling you about what has happened to Native Americans. We read it at Grace in the Desert in our book club. And this talks about urban Native Americans, and that many Native Americans have gone into the cities. Some have done really well, but mostly it's hard. This is a story of Oakland and the powwow, and getting ready for a powwow, which Adrian knows a lot about. And so I would really recommend that because then, but what they have done in this book and what they have done in Oakland is to make big buildings their mountains and streets their rivers, and trying to say that everything came from a particle of dust, and it is the earth. And so they recreate the scenes of where they would rather be living if they could. Have any of you traveled around and seen some of this being pushed onto reservations in your travel that hasn't been wonderful?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Meg?
The town of Guadalupe, where the Yaqui Indians live, is right on the border between Tempe and Phoenix. It's about a mile wide. It's along the 10 freeway, and it's greatly dirt roads. The main roads are paved, but greatly dirt roads. And it was a tremendous target for Sheriff Joe Arpaio. The whole area was really victimized and criminalized, and you name it. I mean, his officers were in there all the time, and their guys was coming to look for illegal immigrants, and they would literally tear down people's front walls with their vehicles. It was a pretty harsh environment. Very, very poor, very gentle, very, very poor people. But they were so out of their element. And the Yankee tribe there was not the main tribe. The main Yankee where the council was in Tucson, and that had a little bit a different piece of land, so they were in a little bit better shape. But they were just damned if they did and damned if they didn't. If they had a driving infraction, the minute they left the reservation, they'd get pulled over and then be fined again, and they couldn't pay those fines, so then they couldn't leave the reservation, and there was no work on the reservation, so of course they couldn't work. The system just kept recycling them. It was terrible.
And Kathleen had her hand up here.
Who did?
Kathleen.
Oh, Kathleen. Yay. Where are you?
I'm trying to help you, Joanne. Not here.
So when Chris and I went across country, I'd always thought Chief Joseph went from Oregon to Idaho up, trying to get to Canada, and realizing then when we were staying in Wallowa that he got shoved out of there to Coville. And then from Coville, he took the tribe all the way to the middle of Montana up by the Canadian border. And then they brought in the cannons. They brought in cannons on women and children in the beginning of winter. And so the story of Chief Joseph, I always thought, oh, he just, was taking his tribe up to, Spokane. Well, no, he was being chased all the way to the middle of Montana. And then what you see is the Indian tribes have all been pushed into these center areas, such as Montana, Oklahoma, and the backside of, the Warm Springs is the backside of the mountain where it's a desert. So it was just interesting because you grew up sort of with these legends and realizing, nope, that's not true.
It's not true. The stories are really different. And I don't think we need to, the stories that I could tell you are way worse than what I am, just in terms of how Native Americans' bodies were treated when they were not okay, and how they were displayed afterwards, and all sorts of things like that. But I also, so I want to change it just a little bit now because of football and baseball and basketball. So let's talk about mascots. And what do we do with Native Americans when we make them our mascots? And how do we portray them by our yells and screams at games?
Warriors.
Warriors. Right.
Kansas City Chiefs.
Right. And those yells, right?
Mhm.
And tomahawks. And so that there is a sense, and you don't experience them when you meet people, of savagery, of that Native Americans are still going to hurt you. And my experience is that I wish they would even stand up to me a little bit more. There's just deference in this city of Flagstaff from Native Americans. They know that you're white and you're up there, and they are not. And I'm always trying to engage in conversation and see what they are doing in their lives if they're young. If a lot of them work in stores, and if I go into the one department store, I'm dying, guys, in Flagstaff is Dillard's. And if you go in there, I just say, well, you're going to school and whatever. NAU, Northern Arizona University, is really incredible about scholarshiping Native Americans and working with them as they come into campus. So the American Psychological Association said we shouldn't do this anymore in 2005. So I think we're taking our time about it, but I think we're going in the right direction for a while here. And we'll go to spirituality in a minute, Adrian. I'm just going to do a couple more things.
Mhm.
Do you all remember, some of you aren't as old as me, that sign that would come on our TV?
Yes.
At the end of the night when they were going off?
Yes.
And what is that? There's a bullseye, right? There's bullseyes because you want to get your TV focused or something, to get it in the right perspective, to turn your knobs right. And then what's at the very top of that a symbol?
An Indian chief.
Right. And that one went on everyone's TV for a very long time when it was black and white. An Indian chief and 4 bullseyes. That's kind of powerful, don't you think? I never remembered that until they're there reminded me of it. But there's been a lot of things throughout history that have done that kind of image. Even if you think about, my brother had plastic Indians and cowboys, and he always had the cowboys slaughter the Indians. We didn't think that way right then. The violence that right now, Indians do violence to other Indians. I mean, not Indians, Native Americans. And we're really working, I'm doing some things, organizing some issues around Native Americans to help women. They're on the reservations. They've had a really tough time. The violence, the rapes are, but 80% of those are perpetrated by white men. But still, there's lots that need to be done for the community. Alcohol is a real problem. And so we're trying to do some things with that. One of the things that happens if you're drunk in this city, which is, and you are out and about, is you can be put two places, one jail and the other the emergency room. And neither one work very well, particularly in COVID, to be put in an emergency room when you're drunk. So we're building a center. We got COVID money to do that. And figuring out how to be the second responders to something when the police come in, because the police come in and they have to do something with someone. But we're going to try to have mental health people go out and talk with them. And I'm hoping to be one of those once we get the truck. But the other thing that we are looking at is somebody talked about this, if you do an infraction, you do something that gets you in jail, like being drunk, you might have bail at $20. You never have that bail, right? You don't have that on you, and you don't have a relative necessarily that can come and do that. So the sheriff here, who is just a great sheriff, has been bailing people out because it costs him $120 a day to have them in the jail. So he pays out of his own pocket some. So that needs to change, right? So there's a lot of things. One of the things that we said when we finished this course is we need to figure out where we're called in the whole scope of racism to make a difference. You know, where can we get involved to continue to change what is happening? I confess to you that when I first moved here, it was COVID, and Shannon was still living in Las Vegas, and I was here. And we had a great idea about buying a washer and a dryer when we got to Flagstaff. There wasn't any washers or dryers anywhere in the country, I think, at that time that were going across, So I said, I'll go to laundromat. Well, the laundromat I went through to was, I didn't realize, was a Native American laundromat. And I learned so much doing that. First of all, I was scared. So I just looked at that. Why are you scared? Well, you're scared off of old stories. Or a lot of it I went really early, and a lot of it was men coming to wash the outfit that they wore the day before and to take it out of the dryer and to wash it to wear that next day. I mean, that's a kind of an incredible thing. When I drove into that, there was always 5 Native Americans sitting on this wall looking drunk and passing a brown bag. It's so stereotypical, right? But the Flagstaff, when I would come out of the laundromat, there would be a couple of police there talking to them, trying to figure out what next to do for them and to move them along. So there is really pieces of great care here yet, but the nations, when you have been put down and put down and put down and put down and moved on, you don't get the kind of education you need. Don't tell me about boarding schools and Native Americans. That's what we hoped, was to make them into us. But thank God those are done too. But that was really an injustice across the whole time. So I'm going to stop now. We're going to go to spirituality. Where's Adrian? Okay.
I'm right here. I'm right here.
Do you want to go over those 5 spiritual things that you found out, and we'll talk about that?
Certainly. The question that we have for you is, did you find the canyons spiritual in nature? And if you did, what was it about the canyons that were spiritual for you? I want to tell you, the other night I posed a question to Joanne. I said, do you find Zion or the canyons more spiritual? And what we learned from the question was that everybody sees it differently. So I want to say that if somebody says something and you don't, that isn't how you see it, please tell us how you see it, because it'd be interesting to get everybody's view about the spirituality they saw in the canyons. You should have the printed material that we sent out, and I gave the various ways that spirituality is defined. Do you want me to go over those?
Just a second. Let's just stay with this question a minute. Yeah, Holly.
I found them spiritual when there was light there.
Okay.
And it reminds me a little bit of even being in a cathedral or some other places. When the light is moving through, that's when I feel the spirit coming through. And so even when you were pointing out the differences between part of the canyon wall that was lit up and the other part that wasn't, it was like, this is creativity and this is not alive right now. The contrast.
We found that when we were very lucky to be there with very few people. And so when we would be at the top looking down in the mornings on the rim, and there's these long trails you can take, I think looking down, you just have the vastness of God. And then, but when you're in the middle, you almost have the love of God. You're just surrounded. This is a very shallow canyon. You know, it is not wide canyons like some canyons. But so other people about spirituality that comes through a canyon. Bonnie?
Bonnie, you're muted.
You're muted.
She said, never mind.
Never mind?
I think she's trying to get it up again.
We have time. We have time. Bottom left. No, okay.
Well, I'll speak and I'll wait. Maybe Bonnie can figure it out.
Okay.
Paul and I went on this trip with Rhodes Scholar, and it featured actually both places, Canyon de Chelly and also Chaco Canyon. Our guide was an anthropologist. She had, let's talk about just Canyon, Chaco right now, because it's really big. And a wall had fallen down that covered the cliff, and some of us climbed up on top so we could look down. The immensity of it all, the highway, there was obviously a highway that led straight forward to out of the canyon that you couldn't really see when you were in the canyon. These people traveled far and wide. It became clear how advanced they were in their irrigation and their spirituality. They had one of those rocks where on the way up there that was like, you know, the rock canyons in Scotland and so forth, with the standing rocks where the sun would come through at a certain time. They had cut a hole in it so that was apparent, you know. It was just so impressive. This was not a basic culture. It was very advanced and organized. And she had this little booklet that showed what stood there. Like when you see at Ephesus, it had the same thing. The booklet showed the standing buildings and the layout and how modern it was. I mean, how knowledgeable these people were. So related to spirituality, I suppose it's just the awesomeness of the place. Much more so than you think even.
Yeah, great. Anybody else? Adrian? You were going back to the very brief overview of the Navajo religion? Is that what we're doing?
No. I was just asking them if they, in the materials, there were four definitions, 4 different ways of looking at spirituality. I don't know what I've done. Oh, I know, I'm writing on it right now. But do other people have thoughts about the canyons and whether they felt a sense of spirituality? Maybe you have to be there, you know, maybe you can't get it from a photograph. I don't know.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I'm curious why Joseph Campbell said that he thought it was such a spiritual place, because he's been so many spiritual places, and just that he did.
I don't know, I can't answer.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't answer.
I think the
that question. Yeah.
continuity, for one thing, for him, it's this idea that someone has lived there all that time, that there's been a presence, not that human beings are
Mhm.
the top level of everything, but that someone had been there, I think was one of the things. But it's also, there's a sense there when you're inside of it of, and that was really true for him. He felt that more than any, and he had been everywhere, but I would have liked him to expand on that. Maybe it's someplace else.
Mhm.
Yes. Yes.
Let's see, Liz.
You know, when the Psalms talk about God enfolding us in his wings, I just felt that looking at those pictures, Adrian, of being enfolded, that to be in a space like that was kind of close in the bottom, it just felt like an enfoldment, that it was a natural habitat to feel protected. And then, of course, when I haven't been to those canyons, I've been to the Grand Canyon, just the sense of awe, awesomeness. And what is man that thou art mindful of him? You know, we're so tiny compared to all that. And yet there's something protective about it.
One of the things about the Grand Canyon versus Canyon de Chelly is the commercialism around it.
Yeah.
I mean, you really can move into the Canyon de Chelly. I mean, you have to have a guide, but that makes it even better.
Mhm.
And, you know, but even, and I would pepper the guide with questions. Finally, he said, "Are you a teacher or something?" But we just kind of found, you know, there's that Y and you go in, whereas it isn't as big as the Grand Canyon, but it is so much, it feels like so much closer to nature.
Mhm.
Not that the Grand Canyon isn't wonderful, and not that everybody who comes to see me doesn't want to see it and I get overawed again, but this is a very, very different experience. Okay, Elaine, is it Elaine? Yeah.
I haven't been to these canyons, but there are some similar, smaller in the Verde Valley in Arizona.
Uh-huh.
And I have been there, and then Oak Canyon right outside of Flagstaff.
It's so great.
Flagstaff. And so we often go there. And there is a sense of the timelessness of people having been there. For me, it's the quiet, it's the wind as it comes through.
Oh, yes.
It is climbing up to some of the ruins and looking out, and then looking down and seeing the small flowers growing. For me, the nature part of it is awesome. And then the sense that people have been there before, and
Right.
there's some part of them that's still there.
I love you reminding us of the wind, because there's a lot of wind up here, and there is something incredible about that wind going through those cottonwood trees, and it's the spirit, you know, it's just a sense of the feeling of spirit. Right. Okay, Adrian, another question. I do think your overview is pretty cool about the Navajo religion, if you want me to take that on.
Sure, take it on.
Okay.
Yeah.
So obviously from, really quickly, obviously from the petroglyphs, and because we know of the powwows and how that Native Americans are recapturing their language, recapturing their traditions, capturing the, you know, coming back with pride into who they are, and they all will tell us that an almighty exists, but it's more a force, and it's a force that brings about harmony. Harmony is really important within Navajo culture. I think it is within any, when you think about nature, you think harmony, don't you? I mean, it all works except when it's being catastrophized, but when it is catastrophic. But they are always seeking a harmony, and it's not pictured as a man in the sky, which we don't do that anymore either, but we certainly did in the past. But it's believed to be formless and exist in the universe, and the sun is viewed as the result of the power of the Almighty. So that symbol, I think, was sun, wasn't it, Adrian, that you were pointing out that was through a lot of the pictures?
I don't know. If that was, it could be the sun. I didn't know what it was.
Yeah. But they don't worship the sun. It is the result of the power of the Almighty is the sun, but not the Almighty. But they do worship living things and a number of gods who are believed to intervene occasionally in human affairs. So things are left out and given to them, their daily prayer offerings, and an elaborate sense of ceremonies, including ceremonial dances, which are performed by masked men and women. And Adrian knows about a powwow. You want to talk about that for a minute if people wanted to go?
Sure. The third weekend in January, there has been until COVID, a big powwow at Mount Sylvanus PCC campus, just right up here, a few miles away. And it's a wonderful powwow. And it's free, and they ask for donations for they're getting scholarship money. But you'll see all the ceremonial dances and all the beautiful, beautiful, I call them costumes. I think that's probably incorrect. But anyway, that's the third weekend in January.
So the purpose of Navajo life is to maintain balance between the individual and the universe, and to live in harmony with nature and the creator. Sounds pretty good to me. They don't have near as much interest in the afterlife as we do. They assume the souls of the dead go to another part of the universe where they have a new existence, carrying on activities as if they were still alive. So they believed in good and evil. They believe that everything in the universe has a purpose, and it is important that the universe remains in balance. If not, evil could take over. And I don't know what they did with their idea of God when they were so pushed and taken over and killed and moved. And I don't know if they just stopped believing it in the same way. Although in this book, it talks about these young men that lived in Oakland starting to get that back again, starting to have a sense of that. Historically, when someone died, their body was buried and their hogan burned. People who attended the funeral took a zigzag route home so no evil ghost could follow them. So, and some of these things are still alive. There is talk among young men in town, or NAU students, which my son is one, of this double ghost that sometimes comes to town and scares the hell out of people, men, probably who had been drinking, I don't know. But there's all these myths about the ghosts coming from the reservations into Flagstaff and scaring young guys. When they described it, I didn't want to see that ghost. So
No.
Joanne, I wondered when they pray to different gods, I wonder if that's almost like some of our religions praying to saints.
I wanted to immediately say no, so that means I need to think longer, because I don't do the saint thing as much as Shannon does. Yeah, it could be. I mean, there's many people who their main way to God is Mary. I mean, that's very important to them. So that might be true. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, they pray to Saint Christopher for safe travels,
Mhm.
Saint Francis, etc. So
Yeah. Other things that people want to add from anywhere that to this conversation about Native Americans or spirituality or what you might see yourself doing in the future around this issue? Cheryl.
Just wanted to add that when I moved from Kansas to Colorado, and my parents lived in New Mexico, and that was ripe with Indian culture. And I got to spend about 3 days on the San Ildefonso Pueblo making pottery. And for me, that was such an awakening of the profound respect for the land. They did the ancient way of taking bear grease to shine up the pots. It was Maria, who was a San Ildefonso Indian, who was famous for bringing back the black pottery and the way to put out a fire by cow pies. And that's what made everything turn black. But anything that we scraped off had to be returned to the earth.
Oh.
Everything was used. There was such a respect for the earth in everything you used, and no waste, that it was just such an incredible experience for me to get to do that.
You saying that reminds me, I read a lot of articles in preparation for this talk of what climate change is doing to many of these reservations. What is already difficult is getting more difficult. And they do respect the earth, and they hate it when they see things being put in on their earth. I mean, on their part of the reservation, trash dumped or whatever. Yeah.
Yes.
Other? Anybody else? Yes, Diana?
I know most of you will never go to Oklahoma City, but in September, a beautiful new facility was opened in Oklahoma City, and it's called the First American Museum.
Oh.
And it's many Indian tribes from all over the country. And as I understand it, the Smithsonian has dedicated or donated a lot of, or loaned, in some cases loaned, but several things about it. The fact that it's this new, beautiful facility. Many Indian tribes are represented, and the fact that they are calling themselves First Americans.
First
which to me has some interesting connotations to it. But anyway, if you ever get a chance,
That's a really interesting point about naming, because when I came to town, I said, Andrew, I don't want to be politically incorrect. What do I call people who I would have called Indians before, but I don't think that that's right now. And then he said, well, a lot of us call them tribal peoples. And so tribal people. And then I tried that out. That was a little hard, but okay, I'm willing. But it really came down to Native Americans is what he came back to me and he said, Mom, I've done a lot of research among people here, the Native Americans who are on the Forest Service, and it's really Native Americans. But I think that what you're saying is, I think that's a whole new way of naming them, and it might change from that. It might change. It's called what? First Americans.
Yeah.
I love that.
I just want to address a technical issue.
Yeah.
Lynn, you're on twice, and would you close your iPod? Close your iPad. That'll take care of it. Okay. That's why it's there's that interference. Okay.
I see.
I have a question, Joanne. When you were talking about the sort of the religious point of view, you were talking mostly about the Navajos.
Yes.
would you say that, not that I think you're the professor of Indian affairs or anything, but well, I mean, is it similar in other tribes? It sounds like it is.
I think creation is the similarity, that somehow God is discovered, or the divine, because they wouldn't have a God, but that it's discovered in nature. And I think, they had that thing where the sun is a reflection of the divine force. I think other tribes would have different ways, because they all had to decide their own, right? Nobody was teaching them, right? They were there at the very beginning, and they passed that on forever. And so, but what is interesting is that the first peoples here said creation is where we experience God. And they didn't, build, like if you think about the Greeks, right? Is there somebody here who knows, they built all their gods and made this whole kind of mythology up there. Not the Native Americans. I mean, I've been to Athens. I mean, they could have gone to nature too, but they didn't. The Native Americans have always been about that. And it's too bad that some of them had to leave their really beautiful places but they're making nature out of Oakland. So there you go. They find it wherever they go. They're looking at particles. They start with this whole idea of that wall is a particle of dust, and it creates this. And we're going to call this a mountain in Oakland because we don't have one, and we need one. I mean, it's just, but they're drawn to that. So they could center around it, so they could look at that and not see big cement mess with graffiti all over it. But, there's my mountain. It's amazing. Anything else before we close? You've been incredibly patient with Zoom this long. It's Adrienne, thank you so much. She's the power behind all this. It was her idea to go there, her idea to do the pictures, her idea to connect. And she's offered, if you don't know, throughout time, when we were there, incredible photography for our archives for Christ Church. She has taken so many different pictures, and I'm hoping that they're still there. And because that is what we pass on, right? Native Americans leave their buildings or their pottery, and we leave our pictures, but it's good to have them. I mean, we can look back on so many fun things that we did and can remember because of her.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank all of you for having us, and thank Joanne. She's just the best travel buddy you could possibly find. We had a wonderful time, and as you can imagine, and all just upbeat laughs, curiosity. It was a wonderful trip. And she says she has another one in mind, so I'll be curious to know what that is.
That's so good.
Joanne,
Thank you both so much.
We are so delighted to have you back, Joanne. And
Adrienne.
No, you are, and Adrienne, but Adrienne's one of us. You've been gone a while, Joanne. But
and I'd say all of us here.
That everyone is welcome at WIS.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be back. I cannot tell you, I started crying when I got off the phone last week just to have seen all your faces and that you're all there. And I look around and I just feel loved by you. And it takes a long time to have what we had in Women in Spirituality, to have that kind of depth and friendship and love. And it hasn't happened quite the same way again, but different things happen at different places. So it's great to see you all.
Well, it was wonderful.
Joanne, would you please end us in prayer of any kind you want?
Okay. Just let me take a minute.
Yeah.
Gracious and healing God, we give thanks for each other, for the women on the screen and the women that have gone before us, that we love and cherish, and for how we can come together in a way that we can nurture and care for each other, have a few little discussions that get a little, and then come back and figure out who you are, that you are a loving God that surrounds us all the time, and that you ask us to learn more about you. And we thank you what we learned about you today from the Native Americans and from the pictures that Adrian took and from our discussions. Thank you. Amen.